Women's Economic Empowerment from UN Women. We have Mr. Shalab Tandon, Regional Head of Operations and Climate Change from IFC. And I'll be the moderator for today. I'm Zui.
Okay. May I request all the panelists to come in front for a quick picture?
Okay. So I'm just going to dive right into it because I think we've been set a good context of the kind of ecosystem work that we've been doing in the field of climate and gender, right? But here I have a very distinguished and diverse panel to talk about this topic. I want to first start off with you, Pooja. Since you're from Salesforce and actually building products on the ground, right? We so I know Salesforce is at the forefront of building agent force, net zero cloud, and so on. But we also have to put this in the context of the realities in the community. So, for example, in South Asia, for example, we have about 30% of women in the labor force participation, right? We have stark realities like 30%. I mean, women are less likely, 30% less likely to even use mobile phones currently, right, than men. So when we're dealing with these realities, I just want to first understand from you that through Net Zero Cloud and through Agent Force, Salesforce is simplifying sustainability for startups, right? But apart from looking at carbon mitigation and tracking carbon outcomes, how do you report through these on um, gender intentionality of climate investments to the companies or the supply chain operations?
Thanks, Joey. And you are right. I think we've also discussed this before that there is a deep gap in the workforce itself. What I will talk about is if you had to look in at outcome, you would essentially have to separate into a database for evidence-based decision making on one hand, which then enables action, right? So the tools that Salesforce has are on the data and analysis layer. So what this essentially means, and I'll talk through both of the ones that you mentioned, there's the Net Zero Cloud and Agentforce. Net Zero Cloud is a very direct fit when it comes to being able to get a bird's eye view of what kind of gender representation exists within an organization. And while this is a fairly vague concept, I think examples really help bring this to light. So, for example, the lowest hanging fruit, of course, is always going to be how many women are in the organization, what percentage of women in a workforce are women, right? So, after that, you have deeper questions, which is if you segment this across levels in an organization, what is the difference then? And we'll all have seen this in our own professional lives that even if there is more equal representation at the entry level, there is significant drop off as you get higher and higher. And as older people say, there is a glass ceiling, right? What a tool like Net Zero Cloud helps you do is aggregate your data and really see what the different points of drop off could be. And this also goes deep enough that you can also look at what is the wage ratio, what is the pay gap at each level. Is there a pay gap at the board level? Is there a pay gap at mid seniority? Is there a pay gap at entry level? So all of these are essential to enable companies to take the right kind of decision, because a lot of these are implicit biases which don't even get acknowledged until there is a database supporting it. So that's on a Net Zero Cloud. Agent Force is a more it's a tool, right? So it enables you to do what you need to do. So this could, for example, if you're an investments organization, you can then assign weight to gender. You can figure out a different scoring system for the investments that you make through Agent Force. You can also get it to implement guardrails. So asking questions like, this year, have you made enough investments into women-led organizations? So these are guardrails that can be easily incorporated, but it is a customizable product and it will eventually depend on the end consumer.
No, I really like the point, and I know we were discussing this earlier that things like wage gaps and having less women on the top are not issues in silo. They definitely affect how any product is going to be built and used as well, right? It affects the decision making on the top. So thank you for bringing that up as well. That's great. And you talked about how these will impact investment decisions in the end. It depends on what is the use case, for example. I'll probably come to you, Shalab, next with that segue. So IFC One is running an accelerator for women-led startups called IFC She Wins. And the end goal is really to channel more funding into women-led startups in climate, right? And we are implementing that accelerator, so we know that a large part of the accelerator also has a lot of AI solutions, right? I want to understand, and given the context also of IFC doing this historically, there's still a large credit gap right now for women, about 1.7 trillion USD right now for women. Also, we know that less than 3% of venture capital funding goes into women-led startups. So what do you think are the de-risking mechanisms to just look at this filling up the gap right now? What is IFC looking at?
Okay, thanks. And I think, Pooja, will probably use your tool as IFC does gender-based investing. So at a very high level, the problem that we are talking about here is lack of credit by women-owned entrepreneurs, MSMEs, etc. Just to give a context, within India, there are about 64 million MSMEs. 25% are women-owned. And of that, 90% only rely on informal credit. Either they get it based on collateral, or otherwise they don't get money easily. That is the problem and scale we are trying to tackle. When you talk about VC funding and all, that's a very small sliver of equity capital going for startups. That's a separate problem. We can talk about the She program separately. On this sphere, what we do is, first of all, the starting point for all of IFC and World Bank Group investments, we have our own internal targets. 60% of all our investments and advisory have to be gender tagged. And by gender tag, we mean there has to be a strong element of gender embedded in all our investing. Capital is ultimately, we believe that capital is one of the tools which can change behavior. So if you give money along with a gender tagging, which forces other banks and institutions to deploy it for women-led entrepreneurs, to deploy it in a meaningful way. I'm sure you all have heard about the term greenwashing. So we don't want gender washing here. That's why tools like yours are and develop detailed KPIs around how many women jobs you created, how many women in leadership you created, how have you created safeguards for the care economy, have you made the working environment safe for the women, have you provided access to technology for the women, have you provided access to credit for the women. So all these aspects are a detailed part of the KPIs for gender investing when IFC rolls out. And that's how we work with partners to push it. Risk-sharing instruments are all just products that come later. First, let's develop the ecosystem around it.
Wonderful. Great. No, thanks for sharing that. With that, I'll come to you, Amar. You are, as UN Women run accelerators for women-led startups. Here, there are two things that I would like to ask you two-part question. One is we need programming in like mainstream programming for women-led startups to get them into the ecosystem with the right support, etc. So how do you see programming specifically for women-led accelerators coming up? What does that ecosystem view look like in supporting? The second one that I want to ask is, what are the leverage points that you see right now? Because you work across the region, you work across South Asia, Southeast Asia. Here is where the climate ecosystem is shaping up. One, in certain countries, it's still very nascent. And so is the AI ecosystem, it's just building up. So this is a very interesting intersectionality to look at. So what do you see are the leverage points right now? Where are the entry barriers, and where would your interventions help?
Sure, thanks for that question, Zoe. I think just a two-word answer to what those leverage points are data and intentionality. And I think we have heard about both of these things since yesterday, how the data needs to be gender inclusive and all innovators need access to data that is gender tagged. And there needs to be intentionality. So it's just not just about having the data, but what are you doing with the data? And how can companies be more intentional or not just companies, but any AI interventions are more intentional in having a gender impact. And that's where what you said, Pooja, and what Sir said, I think comes in very well. I'll just speak a little bit about UN Women and who we are and what we do. So we are the UN agency dedicated to gender equality and the empowerment of women. So we work on programs, policies, and standards that uphold women's human rights and ensure that every woman and girl lives up to her full potential. And we do this through multiple ways, through increasing women's political participation and leadership, ending violence against women, engaging women in aspects of peace and security processes, economic empowerment, and et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into all the details. But this involves working both with governments and with private sector to promote what we call institutional solutioning. And I think that institutional solutioning is really required right now. Zoe, as you mentioned, that some of the climate ecosystems, some of the AI ecosystems are still nascent and are getting developed. So it is important that institutional solutions are incorporated while they get developed. As far as supporting women in climate, women in AI goes, I think UN Women has always held this position that we don't want to treat women only as beneficiaries, but they are also holders of knowledge that can be used as we navigate this transition. So we have been working on entrepreneurship support programs specifically for women across South and Southeast Asia. So we just had a program last year which was focused on ASEAN, where we supported women across multiple climate tech initiatives. Some had direct AI implications, others had future AI implications. So for instance, when I spoke about data and intentionality, so as far as intentionality goes, we often hark back to a framework called the WEPS, which UN Women has developed with the UN Global Compact, which is a set of 7 principles that helps you think about women in leadership, in the workforce, in the marketplace, in community, and things like that. So that's a framework that we refer to. But when it comes to data, we try to work with all of our entrepreneurs that we support to ensure that through their work, they are generating data that is gender inclusive. So for instance, one of our entrepreneurs was an ESG automator kind of an entity. So when they conducted field visits to do their ESG due diligence, we tried to ensure that their data collection tools had a very specific gender angle, and not just about women getting reached, but what is the impact that's happening on them, so that all of that can be used later on, maybe not right now, maybe 6 months down the line, to develop and design more gender inclusive interventions. Thanks.
And we need this at the ecosystem level for sure, because then that's where it percolates, the gender intentionality percolates across all of the effort that goes in, right? I'll come to you, Samhita, now. Maybe just a 2-liner on what resilience AI does for everybody first, and then I'll come to my question.
Thank you so much, Joey. First of all, a huge round of applause for bringing the conversation of women in tech, women in climate. It is a very hard intersection. Huh? All of us are here. Women in finance. These are very hard subjects. It's not a very easy science. So thank you so much for having us and making us possible. My name is Samhita. I represent a company, Resilience AI, and what we solve is natural disasters. A show of hand for floods. Have you ever experienced heavy rainfall? Nice, that's a good representation. So next time when you are worried about flood and it's an organization that you talk about, think about a tool that gives you in 30 minutes for every structure that you are in. It can be your office, it can be your child's school, it can be a building that we are in. We give you the answer to what is the exposure to a natural disaster in 30 minutes using a machine learning tool and AI, of course, at the core of it. It's built by 4 women who have coded from various aspects. They're practitioners of literature, urban planning, architecture, of course, technology, and students of natural disaster for a very long time.
Great. No, thank you. So I'll come to the question, and we've heard from the developers of tools, AI tools. We've heard from ecosystem level approaches of how do we shape this conversation? How do we build the right framework so that large scale financing goes into the right direction, etc. I want to learn what happens on the ground, right? Because one is women leadership. That is the case with Resilience AI because you've built it as 4 women coming together. But also when we're talking about on the ground, we know that women are disproportionately affected by climate change. They're going to be disproportionately affected by climate disasters. How does Resilience AI make sure that these realities are reflected in your models? Right, we make sure that women are represented in the data. Women are the ones collecting the data and are represented, so that then we have that variability of impact being reflected properly. Like, how are you doing that?
Perfect. That's a very interesting question. What is AI? AI is very simple. Think of it, petabytes, terabytes of data coming together at the same time. What a human brain would take longer time, it does it in shorter time. But I always insist, don't remove the human from the loop. So the way Resilience 360 works is there is a human-assisted loop. Now humans have women, men, across genders. We represent all genders. The reason is because natural disasters does not discriminate a gender. It unevenly definitely treats it because of the geo conditions that we live in. So for example, a mother who is left behind with her child during a flood is not, she's getting more affected because she's left behind. There has to be a way to find the child a safe place as much as her, while the male of the family is also trying to find another safe place because there are elderly in the houses. So it's a multi-dimensional facet that comes across when when a disaster really happens to us, when nature is not kind. Now the way Resilience 360 interprets is 3 layers. Layer number 1 is when we do our compute, we run the compute in a way that we recognize schools, we recognize Anganwadis, we recognize in rural America, you will have to recognize community centers. The way it is built is that we recognize the places which has a higher concentration of the population that is usually left behind, the elderly, the women, the children. We also definitely recognize male counterparts, which are gig workers, construction workers, they get left behind as well. But these, what we call, are vulnerable hotspots. So we recognize the hotspots very early on in the system. So for example, if we get the entire Pragati Pendan, we will be able to articulate where are the schools, where are the police stations, where are the Anganwadis, is there a construction right now happening and there are workers there. That's the first level. So recognize the mix. The second thing that we do is who should be tackled first. For that, we do surveys, which is called ground truthing. After the recognition, we run a survey where not just women, everybody collects the data, but these data are more nuanced around socioeconomic vulnerability. Socioeconomic means what's your income level. If you're an artisan, you're a woman who is working in craft, you're a man who is working in craft, what is the loss of livelihood that you have? If you're in a warehouse and you're a promoter of the warehouse, how much business will you lose tomorrow if the inventory is gone? So we calculate that at an asset level to be able to give a synthesis or what we call from intelligence to insight, which he and I were talking about. We tell you that, okay, if your warehouse is gone, this is the amount of damage. So, and you are in a high risk, so you evacuate first. Even if the school is in a low risk zone, we say you evacuate second. The third is the system is a software. You need a laptop. That's all you need to access this system. So it's 24/7 accessible. It's literacy at a scale. But literacy that is decision making, literacy that is actionable, only then can you solve a complex science like natural disaster.
Great. So you are looking at the entire socio-economic lens while building the model, and that's really good to know. What I wanted to understand, because now working with so many women-led startups, what I've realized is that gender intentionality can be very expensive as well. It is expensive to build up models that, because getting this data is expensive. Also from an investor point of view, once you go seeking money, it's not necessarily looked at as a positive always, right? Not to say or most of the times, but it is a barrier that's kind of documented. So how do you look at these two things in terms of practicality and cost and building these?
So, first of all, I personally believe that we have 3 people in this panel who are intentional about investing in women, both from the grassroots. I come from rural India, and I know that SMEs are hugely funded. The problem is that the literacy among women about wealth is still lean. But that's the problem we can solve if we know the problem. It's not that funds are not available. The country is absolutely intentional about bringing women to a place in the workforce where we are able to contribute. So I believe that generating that literacy of what does it mean for you. Why should you have microfinance assets like IFC? Why should you have access to these money? Is a very important conversation to have, and it has to be at a mass scale. It cannot be done by just an institution. As a startup, the investment in women-led startups has moved to 8%, but that's in the consumer business. Women in tech and women in climate, both the nature of which is highly complex, is still at a very low scale. There needs to be more investment, but I must call out at the same time that there are funds like Kalari Capital, which backs us, Vanicola. There are funds like Colossa Ventures. There are funds which are intentional by saying, I want to put more money in women-led complex structures like climate and tech. So that's a welcoming thing, but we need more of it. I will not shy away from saying that it is not needed. It is enough, it is not enough. The third and very important part about this conversation is please build an ecosystem. Everybody uttered the word. But the problem that we have is we all understand and appreciate ecosystem. We are an outsprung of an ecosystem, but we don't execute it very well.
Yeah.
So the trick is in the doing. My only thing that we see in our organization is we have an equal representation of men, women, and we want to bring transgender in the equation. And the second thing that we are doing is retaining the woman in the workforce. So the trick is in the doing. All of us have to take that responsibility singularly. I think then we are collectively a better ecosystem.
Can I add to this
Yes,
a little
of
bit?
course.
So access to credit, and you mentioned how can we increase that? The data is not there. I think, as all of you mentioned, climate disproportionately affects gender. AI is also, I've read many reports, AI is also disproportionately affecting gender, especially in the developed world, maybe even here. But AI itself will also be the solution for increasing access to credit. IFC works with not only a lot of VC funds, but also with a lot of fintech companies. They are all realizing the power of cash flow based lending, the power of non-collateral lending, the power of lending to first time credit users, and therefore they have found a white space which can be monetized by really providing credit to women entrepreneurs and so on. So the trick is to get a lot of that data that you are generating every time you touch a phone or every time you do a UPI payment. That's all data. That will get captured in the AI/ML tools, which will feed into the fintechs for improving credit. So I'm fairly positive that AI itself will lead to a solution for improving access to credit. But at the same time, as you rightly said, skilling is key. If at the women workforce level we don't skill enough for using that AI properly, then there's again a danger of getting left behind.
No, that's a great point. And actually a perfect segue to come back to you, Pooja. I think both these points is what Salesforce is working on, right? From your AI for Impact initiative, where you're looking at how do you create good from AI, right? The second portion of it is also you're working, and there's a whole emphasis on skilling for AI as well, right? And we're doing one of the projects, and I'm sure you're doing multiple other projects in this area. Would just like your thoughts on how, also reflecting on Shalab's thoughts on how this is the key to bringing, like AI can solve for bridging the gender gap. How do you look at it?
It's an interesting question because AI also has the potential to deepen the gender gap. It also has the potential. It is truly a matter of where capital flows at the end of the day and what kind of policies are made, right? But if you had to think about gender representation as a large, complex solution, there's many moving parts to it. One, in fact, that we probably will not discuss today or at any panel is how men have to actually actively contribute to this, right? But and it's critical. That is
Absolutely.
the largest missing piece, and we need to at some point look into it. But taking a step back, I think Amartya Sen's approach makes a lot of sense even in the context of AI when you say, okay, equality of outcome is based on equality of capability and equality of opportunity. Now, AI is an essential tool and will continue to be an essential tool for both. When you look at the capability part, you have mentioned the skilling program that Salesforce runs, particularly in tier 2 cities, with a focus on including women. So that is on the capability front, but of course, this is required across different teams. You need it in education, you need it in workforces. It's capability building is a large, complex exercise in itself. AI, of course, also is going to be a mode of education. It already is a mode of education. It will continue to grow as a mode of education. And hopefully that will increase access to education, if nothing else, and will enable self-learning, which might help lower some barriers. On the opportunity front, I think what you said earlier on this kind of gender intentional investment would also be really critical in doing this, right? Women focused programs which really look at increasing capital flow to women, increasing the ability of women to generate wealth. I think that is very, very critical. And AI will play a role here, which is essentially looking at analyzing investments, looking at your decision processes historically, looking at making sure that this kind of rule is incorporated into your decision making by saying, okay, have you spoken to these many women? How many women-led organizations have you invested in year on year? Is it falling? Is it increasing? What might be the reasons? So AI can enable that process also.
That's true. No, great, thank you. I'll come to you, Amar, now, and on a slightly different angle here. Uh, your your work is at a regional level, right? And we're seeing that the climate and AI solutions that are being built, one, of course, they should be at a very local context, but they can also be scaled up very quickly across regions, right? It can be picked up, so a data AI solution, climate AI solution that's built here in India can be replicated quickly in Sri Lanka, can be replicated quickly in Thailand. And there can be lower barriers there in the scaling up if we have the right platform, a regional platform, a multilateral platform. How does your work lead to that?
Yeah, thanks for that, Zoe. Before I answer that, I would just like to reflect on something that my co-panelist said. So I think when it comes to a disproportionate impact of climate change on women, there is actually UN Women research that notes that in a worst case climate path scenario, about 158 million more women and girls globally may be pushed into poverty as a direct result of climate change, and 240 million more women and girls will face food insecurity. And the number for men is almost half of this. So that kind of shows how the impact of climate change is gendered. And to what you said, Pooja, how AI also has the potential to deepen gender inequalities. Now, I think we heard on some of our earlier panels today how all of us, we have inherited some kind of gender bias from our predecessors, and undoubtedly we will knowingly or unknowingly pass it on to our next generation. What we need to be careful of, that we don't teach it to our machines and we don't teach it to our AI, and that is where the data and intentionality that I mentioned earlier also come in, and AI actually becomes a tool for good rather than deepening the gender divide. So just those thoughts. But coming to your point on taking a more regional approach, you're right. So UN Women, and specifically I work on regional programming. So these are across South and Southeast Asia, and we work with groupings such as the ASEAN, for example, to align country level approaches to climate change or to AI. And we kind of think of five broad pillars. So I know we are short on time, so I'll just quickly mention them. Maybe I can come back to them a little later. But one is developing a regional vision, developing a regional enabling environment, so that all country policies can align a little bit. And groupings like the ASEAN can help do that, because they often provide guidance to countries on frontier topics of policy making. Second is expanding access to affordable finance, and I think enough has been said about that, so I won't spend time on that. The third is, again, I'm using the word, but strengthening innovation ecosystems, and that does not just mean entrepreneurship ecosystems. It also means research ecosystems. It means data capturing ecosystems. Now we talk about the census, for example, which we are talking about right now in India, but there is also an MSME census, right? So how do we ensure that everywhere we develop those ecosystems from a gender perspective? The fourth is devising a diverse and regional talent pipeline, because whenever companies or any intervention has to scale, it needs local talent. So how can that talent pipeline be developed? And last is not losing the focus on evidence, accountability, and learning. Because at the end of the day, we have to be sure that what we are doing is meeting the goals that we intended to do. So how do we bake in learning mechanisms and accountability and evidence mechanisms from the get-go, so that we are ethical in our deployment of AI, and how those guardrails are set from the get-go.
Sure, great. No, that seems well rounded and structured in approach. I want to come to you very, very quickly, Samita. We've heard about the ecosystem approaches, and Resilience AI is a startup that's scaled up. You've had your funding rounds and so on. How easy is it for you to explore and tap into these market linkages for your AI tools?
One must know where to look.
Yeah.
It's a very important part of entrepreneurship. Even if it is a small and medium craftsperson, she or he has to know where to trade, how to get the raw material, how to source, how to sell. So one must know where to look is a common message that we land for any idea that has to scale, including startups like us. It's much more harder when it is scientific evidence-based startups. Things like EV, things like natural disaster, this has a huge component of science. It's not very simple. In those cases, we say collect the scientific evidence and invest a lot of time in research. So teach the machine beforehand, be inclusive about women, children, marginalized beforehand, be inclusive about how does it impact vulnerable communities, how does it impact industries beforehand. Teach the machine beforehand rather than making it, that's the true definition of inclusivity. The second part of it, how have we leveraged the ecosystem? We have, I would say, been fairly successful in knowing where to look. So with United Nations, we have been deploying this in 75 villages in India, where women and men, volunteers from village councils and pradhans have come forward to use a technology like this. All they need is a laptop. It has become a part of their village council conversations. Flip the script. Organizations like a hospitality major in India, which has 52 they have resorts in India. They're using the same machine to understand, okay, I have my 52 resorts in multiple places of India. Can you tell me what is at what grade of exposure? Am I compliant? am I business protected? Are my people protected? And can I manage crisis better? They're using the same tool. Now, that wouldn't have happened if we did not know where to look in an ecosystem. We know that the biggest impact that happens in natural disaster are three. The people, we are displaced. The businesses, trade. So look at the small and medium businesses. And third is the value chain industries. So we have gone after solving this in natural disasters in 3 very critical countries, which constitute 50% of the natural disasters of the world. My submission would be look better, know how to look better.
Wow, that's a great message to leave any entrepreneur, any solution maker with. And last, Pooja, I'll come to you for very quick thoughts. I wanted to learn the role of philanthropy in this whole aspect of climate, AI, and gender, and this intersectionality, because we all know that we've spoken about private capital coming in, we've spoken about entrepreneurs and private companies leading solutions, but we all know that this gap is very, very wide, and we do need philanthropists coming in, we do need this money coming in, at least at the beginning, before when the systems are getting set in place, right? Salesforce has a large program around this. It also gives a lot of these tools at a very subsidized rate to nonprofits and educational institutions. Just some thoughts on this, the role of philanthropy.
Yeah, absolutely. So Salesforce has what it calls the 1-1-1 model, which essentially says we'll give 1% of our time, 1% of our equity, 1% of our product to this type of cause, right? If you look at equality or equal outcome is a multi-layered issue, we are trying to tackle it at every part of this value chain. So of course, like I was saying earlier, it is a high focus for us to ensure that skilling on AI is inclusive across genders, across regions, so that it doesn't become a gated good in a sense, right? That it is not only for those with privilege to access. Similarly, what we are looking at is providing our tools at a subsidized rate to non-profits. And here, when we do this kind of selection, it is very, very purposefully gender-weighted. It's not a good to have, it is a must-have, it is a gender-weighted way of doing it. And now we've scaled our tools across, I think, 64,000 non-profits globally. Now, the role of philanthropy, of course, is far greater than just providing tools. It requires interventions in every way possible. You need to think about childcare on one hand to ensure that women are more represented at the workplace. You need to think about interventions on data collection, which is also really critical. If you're collecting climate data from the grassroots, firstly, that data needs to be funded. Then to make sure that it's gender inclusive, that needs an additional degree of funding. Like you said, these are expensive problems, and every kind of funding that can be unlocked needs to be unlocked for something like this.
No, thank you. Great. I think we've spoken about a lot of things on this panel. I think it was very wide, diverse discussion. I just have about 5 to 6 minutes, probably 1 or 2 questions from the audience is what we can take up. If there is anyone who wants to ask. Okay.
Thank you. I think it was a question both to Salabji as well as Samita ji. I think there was a lot of conversation around the opportunities you've spoken about, but in terms of the challenges around the data, for example, the community data around where some of the flooding is maximum impacted, or where the heat island effect is very high. And for you, Shalabji, like in terms of you mentioned that there is this gap in credit, but is there data that is needed to substantiate that women are perhaps better, more credit worthy and stuff like that? So are there any challenges that you face from a local data perspective that we still need to push for?
Yes, absolutely. I think the data gap definitely exists. There is, for example, there are slivers of credit where there is good data. So when we talk to, let's say, chairman of HDFC Bank, etc., they say when we give loans for housing to women, generally the credit profile and the repayment profile is much better than men. But we need it across all aspects of credit, and that is slowly getting built up. as a lot of the fintechs are working on it, that is slowly getting built up. So if you have a startup idea to build up the data stack for this, I think there'll be a lot of demand from a lot of the fintechs in this space. And that again links to the point I was making earlier. To increase the credit, which is not backed by collateral, we need a lot of the data to substantiate the repayment of loan, which would include things like behavioral profile, things like payment profile, things like cash flow profile, and so on.
Perfect. I won't touch finance today. I'll stay on the science for natural disasters. You said the urban heat island effect. You also mentioned how do you understand whether the flood is in a vulnerable location. We have a different theses into this conversation. We believe that data is abandoned. We believe in it, and that's the fundamental way that the model has been designed. Because if you start designing an AI model or a machine learning tool with a belief that data is not enough, it can go into a rabbit hole from where you can never come out. So when we started our work, we believed that, okay, when we think of urban heat island effect, you just don't need temperatures, do you? You need a lot of other variables there. Can you use proxies? And proxies are always, when we say something as a proxy, remember in the world of AI, it has to be at a 95% equality. It has to mimic. It's not that it's a bad data set. So practitioners, when they come and start building an AI tool and start applying it to solve a problem, there are 3 things we do better. Number 1, we ask the right questions. Number 2, we know where to look. And number 3, we understand and value that data will never be enough. So you use with proxies, but you also then ground truth it through survey intelligence. But by that time, you already have your first level intel, which is, let's say, at least 90% accuracy. Now your journey is from 90 to 96% accuracy. Is a journey you can cover. And that's how we have done Urban Heat Island, by the way. We do it at 96% confidence. We have 8.9 million structures in 200 locations all over the world. It has taken us time to build, but we knew where to look. And it came because of decades of experience among the girls and the boys of this team.
Okay. My next question is for Amar sir. So earlier you expressed the concern that how our predecessors have passed this biasness of men and women amongst our, and how unknowingly we might also transfer it. And you might also said that we need to train the AI in a specific way so as to make sure it doesn't do this same biasness. However, from what I have learned is that the AI is specifically trained on the data sets, and data sets are more specific on humans which are making the data sets. So in an indirect way, we have actually transferred our biasness to those specific data sets as well. So my question to you was that is, what might specific methodologies that you would suggest that we can train our AI in such a way that we can modify the data sets in such a way so that we reduce the biasness?
Right. So as I mentioned, as some of these infrastructure is getting built, it is important to look at data and intentionality from the get-go. So I absolutely agree with you that the way AI is being trained right now is probably on data sets that are already biased, but which is why there are efforts ongoing from the UN system side and from other entities that are working on the ethics of AI to figure out how can trial data sets be developed and deployed in such a way that AI tools can learn from them. And even if the underlying data sets are maybe biased, how can AI itself be used to recognize that bias and counter that bias as AI learns? So maybe some of my other colleagues can speak a little bit more, but yeah.
There is this whole, I'm not an expert on this, but there is this whole research going on something called sentiment analysis and EQ analysis, which captures some of the non-hard data that may be there, and that's where trying to remove the biases.
Yeah, if you're familiar with Anthropic's models, for example, which use constitutional AI, which essentially there is a set of rules which guides the output, I think that is the simplest response you have here, but that of course is something that can be gamed, and people have gamed it to make sure that they get very different outputs. So I would say it's a process of, one, having this kind of constitutional approach to it, and two, over time figuring out what the misuse arising out of this kind of software is and eliminating it one by one, in addition to what already has been said.
Great, thank you so much. This has been a lovely session. I'm sorry we can't take more questions, but you can meet the speakers offline. I mean, I really thank you all for being such a lovely audience. We've enjoyed the session. And yeah, I really have to close because we've been given strict instructions. Thank you.